so that we can put this on our YouTube channel later. Hello, Kimmery, Susan, Kristina, Michelle.
Hi.
Hello.
This is going to be so fun tonight. I can't wait. It's an all-star cast of author friends. Kimmery, I think this was your brainchild. Is that correct? Having all your friends here with you?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. For sure. I was just on a call with some other, and I'm just going to fill some time here to just give Facebook time to let us know that we're live. I was on a call with other bookstores and everybody's like, oh, we're so zoomed out, oh, this and that. But there's the beauty of this, of right here, that would be so hard to do live and in person.
Exactly.
So there is some silver linings to this virtual world, and this is one of them right here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, love it. So like I said, I'm going to give Facebook just a minute or two to let everybody know that we're live and that we're here. Couple things, little housekeeping things. If you're not, okay, let's do this. Kimmery, where are you calling in from?
Charlotte, North Carolina.
It's a little bit later there, so it's about 7. Susan, you I know are in San Diego. What part of San Diego are you calling in from?
I live in North County, Poway.
All right. Michelle?
I am also North County, but I'm in Cardiff.
Okay. And then Kristina, you are?
I am just outside of Portland, Oregon.
Okay. So we have the coast, up and down the coast, the other coast. So hopefully people maybe in between are joining us on this too. If you're not familiar with Warwick's, we're located in La Jolla, San Diego. La Jolla is a little town above San Diego proper. My little sign there says 1896. We just celebrated last week our 125th anniversary. So yay. Lots of things. I always say this. I mean, I know you have had, but it's like lots of things in those 125 years that have happened. Lots of history. But I had this one guy that we were hosting. A book about disruption proof was the title of his book. And I said, well, Warwick's is kind of disruption proof too. We've made it through having a Crown book at the end of our street. I mean, we've
oh wow.
Yeah, we made it through a lot of things. So
yeah, in the 125 years.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. The changes in publishing that have happened. And so it's been pretty good. But tonight, these wonderful authors are going to be chatting for about 45 minutes about lots of things, but most importantly, Kimmery's new book, Doctors and Friends. There's a comment section on Facebook. There it is. I love the cover. It's such a good cover.
Oh, gorgeous.
In the comment section of Facebook, if you're watching this on YouTube later, unfortunately, we're not live with you on YouTube, but on Facebook, if you have a comment or question, go ahead and pop that into the comment section, and I'll be feeding those into the conversation, and Kristina will bring those to everybody as they come in. So don't be shy and ask a question. And also in that comment section, I'm going to be putting in the link to Doctors and Friends. So you can easily click on that. And supply chain issues are real, and it is true. So if there are any books that you would like to order, do so now. And then we're going to run up against the holiday shipping thing. So shop early and shop often. How about that? So with that, I'm going to introduce Kimmery, and we will get the show on the road here. So Kimmery Martin is an emergency medicine doctor turned novelist whose works of medical fiction have been praised by the Harvard Crimson, Southern Living, the Charlotte Observer, and the New York Times, among others. A lifelong literary nerd, I love that because I think I'm a book nerd too. She teaches writing seminars and speaks frequently at conferences and bookstores around the United States. Kimmery completed her medical training at the University of Louisville School of Medicine and the Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. Raised in the mountains of Eastern Kentucky, she now lives with her husband and 3 children, like she said, in Charlotte, North Carolina, where she serves on the board of directors of the Charlotte Mecklenburg, is that how we say it? Mecklenburg Library. There's always one word in all of these intros that trips me up. She's here today to talk about her newest book, Doctors and Friends, like we talked about. Joining Kimmery is 3 extraordinary authors: New York Times bestselling author of A Paris Apartment, Michelle Gable; USA Today bestselling author of many books, Susan Meissner; and a New York Times and USA Today bestselling author, Kristina McMorris. With that, ladies, have a fun conversation. See you in about 45 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The fact that we don't have like the number of participants, like, down below, like usual, because it's being streamed through, it really feels like it was just the 5 of us.
Honestly, it does.
Be careful. Put on this.
Could be more fun than people realize.
We'd be careful. Yeah.
First, I'll, since I haven't shared with everybody else yet, just apologize because your backgrounds all look so nice. And I sat down and went, oh my goodness, all these papers in the background. In case you're wondering whether, it's college application time right now. And tonight is the next big deadline. So that's for my son. And, it is cross off the days as we go. So anyway, so ignore that. Anyway, really, really excited to chat with you guys tonight, and especially about Kimmery's new book. So I'll lift that up again. If you guys haven't seen it, look at that. The cover is, I agree, 100%. It's gorgeous.
Gorgeous.
I love this cover so much. So Kimmery, why don't you kick it off by letting people know, if they're not familiar yet, a little bit about the story.
Yeah, so I usually start by telling people about the timing of the story, because I first had the idea for this novel in 2018 when I was writing an article about the book that I wanted to write. And I pitched the idea to my editor in 2019 and did most of the research for the book and drafted it and sold it to the publisher in 2019. And the reason that is relevant is because Doctors and Friends is about a group of female doctors who are all traveling together at what turns out to be the onset of a brand new worldwide viral pandemic. So not the greatest timing in the world for this book. And originally the publisher was going to pitch it as The Hot Zone meets Sophie's Choice. So if you've read either of those two books, you're kind of cringing right now, because it gives you some idea of the main plot line, which is the protagonist is an infectious disease doctor at the CDC in Atlanta. And near the end of the pandemic, which she herself is instrumental in helping to formulate the American response to, near the end of the pandemic, her little boy and her teenage daughter both become deathly ill. And she just happens to have access to one dose of an experimental antiviral medication. And I know that that sounds implausible. I actually based that scenario on a couple of real life circumstances. So that's what the book was about when it was first written, and that was around early 2020.
Right, which nothing happened after that.
Yeah.
Actually, haven't we all agreed that year just did not happen? Like, we went from 2019.
As far as like my memory is shot, so it basically didn't happen.
Were you freaked out when you like kind of all this was coming together? Like, first of all, writers are paranoid in general, I feel like, about like, is this the, like you said, oh, is bad timing, the right timing? Oh my gosh, you always have a book that comes out and it's like something else that's, when my first book came out, there was someone with my same name getting arraigned for murder. Like, it's like there's always something.
What?
Yeah,
That's actually
Google Michelle Gable, you'll see. But were you like, what was your first feeling as this? And then did you take it more seriously because you were like, because you'd already kind of played out the whole scenario of, because at first I think most people were kind of like, okay, whatever, it'll be gone in 2 weeks. So were you like, how were you feeling with the book and everything else? It's just fascinating to me.
Well, that's a whole lot of questions rolled into one. I think to answer one of your early ones first, I think it is kind of good timing, but mostly bad timing. As you guys know, the wheels of publishing turn very, very slowly, unlike the wheels of emergency medicine, my other career, where you are always rushing around like you're on fire. But in publishing, everything takes years. And so we knew that by the time the book came out, everyone in the world would have lived through a pandemic and would be unable not to apply the filter of their own experience to this book. So we almost pulled it. We talked about that. Because I think a lot of people understandably, somebody who wrote on one of my Facebook posts about the book summed it up perfectly. And her comment was, ain't reading nothing about pandemic. I'm like, I get that. I totally understand why people would feel that way. But there's also a segment of readers, I think, who are really curious to see the alternate universe in this book, the way things could have been and the way someone imagined it before it happened. So some people are drawn in by curiosity about it. For me, it was just surreal. I had been living in my own personal pandemic for 2 years by the time COVID happened, and I couldn't believe it was happening.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll chime in too and say that first of all, I should have started with this. I love the book. She already knows.
It's so good.
That not everybody else knows that I love this book. It's so good and riveting and fascinating because of what we went through. I think to kind of get another side of it in a
Absolutely
fictional world, right? And the doctors and how they're analyzing things, but how 3 different women handle it different ways and 3 different types of doctors. And when they don't know what's coming, it's really interesting because in that way, don't you guys feel like we're sort of like the people in the movie where it starts with, the big climax and they say, 6 weeks earlier, right? And you're like, how did they get there in 6 weeks?
right.
We already know how.
Yeah.
And those people don't yet, and so
Yeah.
So I thought that was fascinating. And I will say too, I am not the only one who loves this book. It also has 3, okay, it's hard enough, you guys know, we all know this, to get 1-star review from one of the literary big publications. She got 3.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Featured in Newsweek and Parade magazine. It does like everything. So this is, I think that goes beyond the fact that it's just interesting timing. It is just a good book, no matter what.
Absolutely.
And I will say too, I remember speaking of that, of who's interested in reading this and who's not. And I understand, boy, I can't imagine the fear that you had on the literary scale. But I remember you guys remember when the pandemic broke out and on Netflix, like all the top favorite trending movies were like Contagious and Outbreak. And I'm like, oh my gosh, people are really, I think they're fascinated by it. And so I think it's trying to make sense of it all. I think that I think it's really good. So anyway, so tell us, so you finished the most of the first draft, correct? Or all of it beginning of 2020, you were ready to go with the book. Is that right? Or how much editing came after that when the pandemic started? How about that?
Well, a lot of editing happened afterward. So we decided, obviously, to pursue publication, but my editor had a request, and she said, and I think this was very smart, everybody will have lived through a pandemic by the time the book comes out, but not everyone will have lived through a pandemic on the front lines. So could you rewrite some of the scenes so that the focus is not wholly on the infectious disease doctor, but also shows the perspective of some other physicians in the book. So I changed 2 of the characters to point of view characters. Do y'all hear feedback when I'm talking, or is that just me?
Yeah, I do hear a bit of a feedback. I don't know what it's from. Not a technical person.
I don't have Facebook open, so if it gets annoying, I'm sorry.
Okay. Not that
But
bad.
I think that the book changed a little bit in that respect because you see things through the eyes of characters that you didn't originally. And one is an ER doctor in New York City, and the other is an OBGYN in San Diego. And the ER doctor finds out this big life-changing secret her husband has been keeping from her right as she's about to go on this girls' trip to Spain and Morocco with her med school friends. And the OBGYN, ironically, despite the fact that she spends her days and her nights bringing babies into the world, has been struggling with infertility, and she finds out that she's pregnant right at the early days of the pandemic. So they each have their own storyline and their own arcs. And so that changed. I did also add Zoom scenes to the novel after 2020, because you literally cannot have a pandemic without video conferencing in your pajamas.
I wondered about that when the friends they have you didn't call it Zoom, you said video conferencing, but I did wonder, I'm like, did she know that was going to be so ubiquitous?
Nope, I added that.
I love it.
I added a few things, but we had to really think about which of the events and portrayals in the book that differed from our own actual reality to leave alone and which to change. And we wound up leaving all the big societal and governmental responses to the fictional virus the way I had originally written them, which was much more utopian. I always tell everybody that the book has a lot of humor in it. And one of the humorous things is that everybody's on the same page about what to do.
Yes, there's not much debate about the course of action.
There's a really scientifically literate young female president, and I actually modeled her after a real life person.
Yeah, I loved the president. She's great.
So
Kimmery, did you notice when you were writing that your creativity suffered at all? I know for me, when I was writing during the pandemic, I thought I was writing something that was pretty good. And then when I turned it in, I found out it was a train wreck. And I had to go back and pretty much rewrite the book that I wrote during the pandemic. I don't know, do you feel that your creativity took a hit?
Well, for sure, my brain power took a hit. And I'm also pretty open about the fact that I had COVID and developed long-term symptoms myself from it. But I think it was just so hard. Like everything was for everyone. You know, you were distracted in entirely new ways in 2020. What about y'all, Michelle and Kristina? Could you write?
Well, I sold a book on March 30th, 2020, and then it was due, and I sold it on a proposal, and it was due, I think, September 1st.
Oh,
so
no.
I had, it was a lot. I mean, on the plus side, you know, I didn't have to go anywhere, wasn't carting kids around, but that was extremely difficult. I remember at one point, just, you know, the whole brain thing, we all had that, right? It's hard to focus, but I had to. And I remember at one point just being like, okay, Michelle, you're not going to be able to like meditation app your way through this book. Cause I'm just like, time for a meditation app. I can't focus. I'm just like listening to meditation app. I'm like, I mean, while that's good for you, it's actually not writing a book. So it was very difficult.
Yes, same with for me, and actually Sue and I, she knows this firsthand, because she and I are finishing up right now in our edits right now with a collaborative novel with Ariel Lahan, and we sold that book. When was that, like February that we got together that said, let's do this? I think so. And we're like, oh, we thought, oh, this is going to be so fun and easy. The three of us, we just write a third of a novel because nothing's happening after this. Definitely, especially with me having to push that deadline back, you know, because my brain for my solo novel, The Ways We Hide, just every day. I don't know about you guys. Well, I heard a little bit, but just brain power wise, like Kimmery, it would take me all day, like 10 hours of trying to write, and I would get through a page. Like it just wasn't coming fast at all. Every word was hard and like a fog, like, you know, didn't have I think the medical brain fog, but it felt like something close. Like I just couldn't get words out. It was a challenge.
And my kids were home that whole early part of 2020. And my youngest didn't know how to function on a screen. She didn't have a screen, you know? So that was nothing got done.
Yeah.
So what about the research for this book? Because that's something that I think we can all speak to. We're all researchers, all writing historical fiction. So tell us about the research behind this one, since we're already a doctor.
I mean, I admire you historical fiction writers so much, because I did do a lot of research for this book, and it probably pales in comparison to the amount you do for every book. So I did leverage some of my medical training, obviously, but I'm not an infectious disease doctor. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a virologist. So I crowdsourced a whole humongous group of nerds starting in 2020. So I was talking to people, or starting in 2019, rather. I formed a big Facebook group with people in private practice and at the CDC and the NIH. And my protagonist is the graduate of a special program within the CDC called the EIS, the Epidemic Intelligence Service, which is this real life group that the CDC trains to investigate and try to constrain outbreaks of disease. And so I was talking to people who have done that program, and I wound up also adding in a huge group of ER doctors, even though that's my specialty. And I stayed in touch with them throughout 2020. So I was getting in real time these agonized emails from people who were, they were anguished and bewildered and overworked and exhausted and fearful, and, just everything you can imagine when you're seeing death over and over and over again, or people suffering over and over again. And so I would go back now and look at those emails, and I just want to find all of those people and hold them. It did actually change some of the scenes in the book for me.
I love that idea of having a Facebook group of all your, because I thought this, I'm like, I mean, you said it pales compared to the research I do, but I don't think so, because you had to do, I was like, oh my gosh, how do you speak from like three different physicians' point of view who do practice vastly different medicine? You know, they're so different. It's not just like, oh, we all went to medical school, we know the same thing. Like, that's just not realistic. So I was so impressed with how many angles you cover. And you have to be more precise, like at least with historical fiction. You can be like, oh, close enough. Right. But, you know, it was very impressive. And I love that idea of having a Facebook group of the different sources. That's really cool.
Well, it turned out to be a more ambitious book than I set out to write, because it wound up having 3 points of view from 3 different specialties set in 3 different time periods.
Yeah, it's crazy.
After the pandemic, during the pandemic. Actually, you see them afterwards, before, during, and then back afterwards again. So yeah, I love crowdsourcing people on Facebook. And when you get this whole group of brainiacs together on a Facebook page and ask them questions, then you get some really trippy responses. And so a lot of that is stuff I wound up using, like having camels be the vector of the fictional virus that came from somebody in that group. And there were people helping me understand nanobodies and helping me understand all this epidemiologic terminology. And so I love those people.
Wow. And your title, it's doctors, but it's friends. So the interplay between those 2 words I really like, because they're not just doctors, they're friends, and they're not just friends, they're doctors. So do you feel like this hits the notes of friendship really hard, or is the friendship part, would you consider that more of a secondary thing? Or is that really the primary thematic pull?
I do feel all of my novels have revolved around the concept of friendship as a fundamental human relationship. And that really is the dominant theme in all 3 of my books, and certainly in this one. Now, I will say, Susan, I did not pick this title. I did not even like this title, although it has grown on me, because it really does tell you what the book is about. And I had all kinds of suggestions for it that the publishers didn't like. Like, I wanted to call it Refrain from Embracing. Nobody wants a title that has refrain.
That's awesome. I like that.
I like that too. Time for embracing. You know, like from the old Ecclesiastes.
You had a chapter called Refrain from Embracing.
I did. I used it as,
I noticed that. I'm like, that's a cool title.
Yeah.
I am really good at chapter titles. That's been my favorite part of all of my books. So if you look at the list of chapter titles, I can kill that, but I cannot come up with a title for a book ever. I'm really bad at it.
Same.
Let me ask you, and by the way, before I ask another question, I should mention too, if anybody watching this wants to chime in with questions, go ahead and just type those in, and those will be sent on over to us. So we'll weave those in throughout. So as far as, so we talked about title, everybody always wants to know about cover, right? Because cover art is so much fun when we like the cover.
Yeah.
I should add that. So tell us about how the process went for your cover. Your idea, their idea, was it your first choice?
No, so there were a couple other potential covers that I didn't like at all, because they were really, really cheerful, and I thought this might be a little bit misleading. And then there were a couple that were really dark, and I wanted it to reflect that the book was about a pandemic, but the publisher didn't want to lean into pandemic parlance or imagery, so we compromised. And the first version of this cover had weirdly masculine silhouettes on it, but I could see how cool it was. I loved the idea of seeing these friends' faces in profile. And all of my covers have had floral imagery on them. And if you look really closely, there's some little viral elements, but you have to kind of look to see them. So I always tell people the story of my book covers, because my first book, The Queen of Hearts, which I should have brought a copy of and don't have one sitting here, but they did ask me what I wanted on the cover. And I said I wanted an anatomic drawing of a heart to reflect the medical specialty of the protagonist, who was a cardiologist. And they didn't want a naked heart on the cover because they thought a naked heart would be gross. So they covered it in this mixture of flowers that was supposed to be celebratory and funereal, to illustrate the circle of life in a medical practice. And the background was the color of scrubs, and there were birds and bees woven into this. And it wound up being this hugely successful cover on Instagram. All the bookstagrammers were showing it.
It's so cool. Yeah.
And so the publishers told me that they wanted to continue the concept of having the cover art reflect the medical specialty of the protagonist. And I said, well, you know, my next book is about a urologist, right? And so I was like, that's going to be a whole lot of flowers. I really wanted them to put a penis on the cover, and they would not. But they did a great job. A great job with that cover. Oh yeah, there's the Queen of
Yeah,
Hearts.
there it is.
It's such a stunning
So
cover.
pretty.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So the graphic designer for Berkeley, my publisher at Penguin Random House, is so talented, and I think that would be such a fun job. Don't you all like coming up with book covers? And I have loved your all.
I just wouldn't be good at it, but I love book covers. I mean, it's such a cool, as Kristina said, it's such a fun thing to talk about and look at and analyze.
Mm-hmm. So as far as ideas go, like we talked about the covers, what about, I don't think we talked yet, right, about the idea for the story, where that came from originally. So you mentioned that some of it was based on true story, of course. But since this was all pre-COVID, where did the idea come from?
Well, the idea for the protagonist is based on the personality of my father, who is this very singular, logical, scientific, but funny guy. And I wanted that's how I actually came up with the idea of an infectious disease doctor, because although he was not a doctor, infectious disease doctors are very innovative and very imaginative. And I thought that he would have been an ID doctor. So the idea for the plot came from a book I read in mid-2019 called Crisis in the Red Zone by Richard Preston, who is the same guy who wrote The Hot Zone. And this book, if you recall, this was about the 2014 Ebola outbreak in Western Africa. And there was widely publicized news story that occurred at the time where there was an aid camp in Sierra Leone in which a doctor and another medical worker both contracted Ebola and were both hours away from dying. And the medical director of the camp, a doctor named Kent Brantley, realized that he had access to only one dose of an experimental antiviral medication. So I know that sounds very implausible, but that actually happened. And as a matter of fact, for you San Diegans, I believe the drug, which was called ZMapp, was actually synthesized by a biotech startup in San Diego. And there were only 6 doses of it in the entire world. One of them turns up at this camp in Sierra Leone. And if you'd like to know how that happened, I would recommend reading Crisis in the Red Zone, because it is a fascinating nonfiction story with all these ethical implications. But he had to choose which of his 2 dying colleagues he was going to treat. And I read that and I remember thinking, what if that had been his children? And when I say that, everyone assumes I'm a psychopath, but actually you guys know the mantra of all fiction writers, of course, is to give your characters terrible moral dilemmas, because there's never been a work of fiction where nothing bad happened, right? You have to have something happen for your characters to overcome. And that to me was the ultimate horrific decision that anyone could ever have to make.
What about?
Well, how did he decide?
I know, right? Everyone, right. So I can tell you what happened. Well, actually, no.
We'll read the book.
I'll tell you this. As part of the research I was doing to set the scenes in my novel, part of which occur in Northern Africa in Morocco, and part of them occur in the Central African country of Chad. Patient Zero is a doctor from Chad, and he's traveling to Northern Africa. And I was interviewing people who practice in Chad. And I was astonished to learn that a couple that I am online friends with and admire greatly, he's an ER doctor, she's an OBGYN, and they're raising their 5 kids in Chad. They actually lived through a similar circumstance when 4 of their children were exposed to rabies, and there was not enough immunoglobulin in the entire country to treat more than 1 person. And it is, and what they lived through is an astonishing story. I'm really hoping that they write a memoir. They're an incredible couple. So Julie, if you're listening to this someday, I hope you'll have them talk at Warwick's. They're amazing, amazing people. So I interviewed them and heard this whole story about what happened. And I had already written the first draft of the book at that point, but hearing their story kind of put it in perspective that this is just fiction and what they lived through is real.
Wow.
And then why did you pick San Diego too for part of the story? Is that why? Because
I love San Diego. First of all, I'm always hoping I can do a work trip to San Diego. I have a lot of connections there. My husband was raised there. My in-laws live in La Jolla. My sister-in-law lives there, and I love the city. And so actually book number 4 is set in San Diego, my next one.
Nice.
So how about a writer's retreat, y'all?
Oh, I'm always up for that. That is awesome.
nice and quiet. It sounds good. So I was going to ask you about, you mentioned long haul. I know you were a long hauler, and or people, what we call, of course, having the long term symptoms from COVID. And like you said, I know you've been really open about it on Facebook and social media, which is amazing to share, as everybody was kind of learning what that was. How did that play? Did any of that play then into your story? And how do you feel? How has that been about sharing with people online?
I'm pretty open about sharing it. I write a lot of posts about COVID on Facebook from a medical perspective because, people are just bombarded by so much information, so much misleading information sometimes. And I think it's helpful to kind of go through common questions and address them, systematically. But also, I think, I haven't made a secret of it. It's happened to so many people. And I developed COVID in summer of 2020 before vaccines, and developed a condition called parosmia, which you've heard of anosmia, where you can't smell. Well, parosmia to me happened about 3 months afterwards. And it is where everything that has a scent of its own, to me, smells like rotting meat or a dead body. So anything that you can smell, lemons, garlic, like smelling the back of my little children's necks, like all of that just absolutely reeks to me. And for months, I wanted to, claw my nose off my face. It was just so distracting and disabling. And I also had a lot of problems related to dysautonomia, which is where the automatic functions of your body, like your heart rate and your blood pressure, are all out of whack. And so I'd get extremely exhausted and tachycardic, where my heart would beat very fast and my blood pressure would drop low, and I'd feel like I was passing out, and I'm short of breath with exertion, and get this weird rash on my arms and on my toes, and like all these bizarre systemic responses to COVID. And I just want people to know that that is common. That happens frequently to people who didn't have severe illness and who did not have compromised health to start with. So I kind of use it as a motivation for the measures that we can take to control disease, i.e. vaccination and masking and things like that at the appropriate times and so forth. So I try to answer questions about it because I'm sympathetic also to the idea that things like that aren't well understood and they can be frightening.
How are you feeling lately?
About the same. I actually went to a long-term COVID clinic for the first time today. I keep thinking it's going to get better, and some of it has gotten a little better.
And then, so what was we covered kind of what is the hardest. Usually we ask, what's the hardest part of the book? And it's usually like, oh, this plot point. So obviously the whole world, but what would you say beyond everything that you've mentioned was each book, kind of has their own challenges from your Queen of Hearts and, your past books. What would you say was different this time that you felt like you tackled?
Well, the hardest scene for me to write was the scene where the mother is in the ICU with her 2 sick children. And normally I am not super precious about my characters because they are fictional. But writing that, I guess it just, it was a really evocative time in history. We were all feeling raw and traumatized. All of our children had been through hardship, no matter what happened. And it just wrung me out writing those parts of the book. So I tried to balance that with sweet scenes and scenes that were funny. And in fact, whenever you write about children, there's humor inherent in that because kids are so funny. My own children are, really captivated with the idea that the mom in the book has to pick between her kids. And so in my house, whenever anybody screws anything up, the other kids are like, you can make any, I just didn't want to write a completely grim book where the trajectory is like this. So it really is just like any other book that has highs and lows.
Yeah.
As all of yours do. And I think also, I should say, Susan also has written a pandemic novel.
True. She sure has.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I didn't know either. Like you didn't know. I didn't know what we were in store for. And I wrote a book about the 1918 pandemic that came out in the centennial in 2018, as bright as heaven. And no one it had been forgotten. In fact, one of my research was called The Forgotten Pandemic, because the 1918 pandemic was, it's still worse than COVID. And I hope that we don't surpass it with ours, because it was awful. 50 million people died of that pandemic. And so I thought as a novel that would come out during the centennial would be of interest, because there'd be interest in that historical event. But it pretty much went by unnoticed. And it wasn't until we entered into our own pandemic that people started talking about that one. And there are definitely some similarities. And one that I like to bring out is that it ended. If any of you are wondering, are we ever going to see the backside of this? I just have to feel like we are, because every pandemic that I studied, to be able to write that one, there's always an end date. So I hold out hope that there's going to be a view of this in the days and months to come.
I love that, Susan. Thank you.
Yeah, the thing about that's why we read historical fiction, right? Because typically we try to leave some, at least hope, if not a happy ending at the end,
Yeah.
because everybody does make it through somehow. And it feels so long when you're in it, right? But looking back, it looks like just a short period of time. It's a couple paragraphs in a historical textbook. So
Right, exactly.
That was also the beauty of writing a book about a pandemic, is I controlled the ending, and there was an ending.
Hey.
I bet you get jokes, don't you? About like, you have now what you're going to write next better be really happy for all of us, because it's like
I get a lot of that. A lot of people asking me, is there going to be an alien invasion? And that was very, foretelling of the future, because we know that there will be another pandemic. There always is another pandemic. We have lived through plenty of them before, and there will be plenty in the future again. I just didn't think it would happen immediately.
Yeah, seriously. So I got a couple questions here for you. And first of all, just a comment from Anissa Joy Armstrong, who said, "It is a wonderful book, loved it," with lots of exclamation points. So yes, we agree with her. Somebody, Ronell, I think is how you pronounce it, is asking about your next book, but I think we're gonna string that along until the very end, because you have to stay here until she'll talk about that for sure. Lots of people are asking about book number 4, is what I'm being told. So that is awesome. And Lori has a really good question. She said, "Kimmery, do you recommend starting with your first book before reading the current one?"
Well, they're not a series, but they are set in the same fictional universe, and they're sort of spinoffs of one another. So the major characters in one book are minor characters in the next one, and the minor characters are then the major characters. So you could read them in order and maybe understand a little bit more, but you don't have to. They're all standalones.
Awesome. And then are you all researching something new right now? Because we won't talk about what like our next book coming out yet. But can you talk about, all of you, what you're working on right now, if it's not just the next book coming out?
I'm just working on the next one coming out.
You guys write more than one book at a time. I know you two are writing more than one book at a time.
Yeah.
Not by choice.
Hey, tell us about your collaboration too.
Well, I love our idea. It's one that it's a true story. It's been itching to be told, about nurses in the Pacific, in the Philippines to be exact. And you wouldn't believe how brave these women were. They were actual people, 80 some Army nurses and a dozen Navy nurses who were deployed to the Philippines before the war. We had hospitals there. It was an American territory. And so they were there when it fell to the Japanese force, and they became uniformed prisoners of war, female. And so Kristina and I, we each have a nurse. Ariel has a nurse, and we're taking them through. It was hell really for them for 3.5 years. And they just did amazing things with nothing. They had these field hospitals and prison camp hospitals, and they nursed people with nothing, like treating malaria without quinine. They were just amazing, amazing women. And we fictionalized 3 of them to tell their story, because it so deserves to be told. Don't you think, Kristina?
My gosh. Yeah. Yeah. So it was amazing because as we started researching the idea, found that there were 3 different types of nurses. And so it was Army nurses, Navy nurses, and Filipina nurses. And so, you know, being like the half Asian, I'm like, I'll totally take the Filipina nurse, you know, and which was so exciting for me because you don't hear much about, I mean, we hardly hear about these nurses at all.
My grandmother was a Navy nurse in World War II in Guam.
Wow.
Okay, amazing. So yes, we know a little bit, you know, we have a glimpse of what their lives were like. And but you definitely don't hear about the Filipina nurses. You know, and it is almost impossible to find a memoir or anything written about them. So that's pretty exciting for me. So I have Filipina friends that were all my best friends growing up, and all of their aunts and some of their uncles are all nurses. And I didn't ever think about till I started researching why that is, how prevalent that was in the Filipino community. So that was really cool. And so, yeah, we're pretty excited. We're right in, like I said, we're in the edits phase, and it's coming out October of next year.
Oh, wow.
You know, for regular people, right? For normal people, that sounds far.
That sounds very soon.
Close. It's coming too soon. So yeah, so that's pretty exciting. So what about Kimmery? Are you able to talk yet about, are you working on another book right now?
Well, I'm working on the next book. I can't even fathom having another idea after that.
Me either. I'm right there with you.
What is yours about, Michelle?
Well, we're going to talk about at the end, the one that is coming out next year. It's set in World War II in Rome, about a woman who was she's produced propaganda for the Germans to make it look like it was German. So basically trying to get them to lower their morale and give up and all that kind of stuff. So
did you go to Rome?
Not for this book, but I have been to Rome. I love Rome. It's my, I mean, I know like A Paris Apartment, whatever was my first book, but I do think Rome might be my favorite city. And it kind of looks at like propaganda, what it does to not only people that are receiving it, but the people that are having to make it up, even if it is for, you know, a good reason, you know, to win the war. Make the Nazis feel bad about themselves. So my edits are actually due today, but I haven't quite turned them in. Haven't quite turned them in yet. After this, later tonight, you know, a California time. So.
You know what? I actually just got the green light that says we can talk about our next books. Julie said, you can talk about them. Like, okay.
I saw that. That's why I kept going.
We're trying to be good. We're trying to be good. We're trying to listen to Julie.
I saw that. So that's why I kept going.
Yeah. So are you able to share a little bit more about Storywise, or is that what you want to talk
that's basically, you know, it takes place in Rome. It has several different viewpoints, and it's towards the end of the war. So it's after Rome's been liberated and the Americans are occupying, but there's still part of Italy is still occupied, and they're sending, and it's based on a real woman who won a Bronze Star for what she did. And she developed these propaganda campaigns, as well as she would train prisoners of war to actually deliver the information, and you know, has multiple time periods. There's also a modern character, and again, it looks at that idea of propaganda and what it does, you know, also the people that are having to create it.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds so good. I cannot wait to read that. Can I read it early?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I'm happy to send you an early copy.
Got all like the witnesses now that you'll remember.
Yes. Oh, I'd be happy to.
Early copy. So what about you, Suze?
Yeah, my solo work, I'm working on that now. I just got it back from my editor, so now I begin the work of revisions. But we had a really good conversation. There's a whole lot she loves about this book, and this is the one that I wrote during the pandemic. That was kind of an awful thing when I first turned it in. But this new version she really likes. I'm really excited about getting into the revisions because I think I'll be able to pull off what she wants to do to make it even better. But what it's about is the backdrop is a movement that's not around anymore for good reasons. It was not a very good idea. But in the early part of the 20th century, there was a movement called the Eugenics Movement, and it was really popular here in the States. In fact, it was so popular that 30 states had eugenic laws on their books that allowed them to sterilize people who they thought should not be having children. And that was this idea that eugenics was all about improving the gene pool and having a healthier, happier society. And this idea that we could cut down on crime and poverty and indigence and illiteracy by just having happier, healthier children. The only way to put forward that plan is to decide who should not be having children, and that's what happened. And it got out of hand. And the ideology that we can have a master race, okay, that's not new. You guys know where this is going. It was picked up by somebody who you might know. Adolf Hitler was very interested in our eugenic leaders' thinking and essays and our books, and wanted to hear more about it. And one of our eugenic leaders even went over to Germany in the 1920s and shared with him about what it would be like if we had genes floating around the gene pool. And of course, he took it to its most awful end of the spectrum, the final solution. So it sounds appalling, and book, I don't want you to feel like it's going to be a downer. It really is a book about some people who are impacted by the eugenic movement, not only here in the States, but also in Vienna, Austria, during World War II. And this idea that everybody has intrinsic worth, everybody. And so I'm working on the ending. It's going to be a good one. It's going to be satisfying, even though I'm not going to sugarcoat what really happened. California, my home state, led the way in sterilizations. You wouldn't believe how many people they sterilized in state institutions. And a lot of these people just had, some of them were just dyslexic or epileptic, or they're alcoholics, or they just had a poor start in life. And they sterilized too. You'll be happy to know that all the states that had eugenic laws on the books, they've all been removed. It took a while to get them all off. California was late. It happened not until the 1970s, but it's good to know that they're all gone. And that's why you don't hear about it anymore.
There's some like so one of the leaders of the eugenics movement, I don't remember who it is. There's like still a statue of him on Stanford's campus.
Oh dear. Wow.
Crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about you, Kimmery? What are you working on? Now you can tell.
So my fourth book is set in San Diego because, again, minor characters become major characters, and it's about an orthopedic surgeon who is married to a biotech venture capitalist, and his company, the biotech VC guy's company, is about to go public when she uncovers a startling finding from his past. And his company, by the way, is developing products that will significantly expand the human lifespan to hundreds of years. And this is all based on stuff that is actually being researched. I'm like the opposite of you. You guys are writing historical fiction. I'm writing like the future.
Historical, or yeah, futuristic. Yeah, but near future.
So she uncovers this fact about her husband's past, but they have an incredibly strong, devoted marriage, and they love each other deeply. And she's not sure what the right thing to do is. And and there are going to be some scenes probably in La Jolla and in Warwick's, for that matter.
Nice.
Very cool.
Nothing to do.
What about you, Kristina?
So aside from our collaborative novel, which I don't even know if we're so tired, aren't we? I don't even know that we mentioned like the title. It's called When We Had Wings. And because they were known as, the nurses were dubbed by the soldiers afterwards, they were so in awe of them, of what they did, that they were called the Angels of Baton. Mm-hmm. So that's where they got their nickname. So aside from that,
Great title.
I am also juggling edits back and forth between two. So between that one and the other one is my solo novel that, like I said, that I bled on every page, called The Ways We Hide. And that one, in short, which I can finally talk about, I've done so many of these with Warwick's and never been able to talk about it yet. So it is about, in short, a female illusionist who is haunted by her past, and there's a reason why she became obsessed with escape and Houdini, etc. And because of her skill set, and part of this part is based on a true story, is that a magician, then mastermind behind an act, gets recruited by British intelligence known as MI9. So we're all familiar with MI5, MI6. Yeah, it keeps going. And if you haven't heard of them, there's a reason. So that means they're better at their jobs, right? If you've not heard of them. MI9 was the go-go gadget team, essentially, of World War II. So their job was to come up with escape and evade tools and everything that you can imagine, toothbrushes, hairbrushes, turning, anything that had metal to it, like a shaver, was all, what I was about to say electrified, but that's not right. What's the word I'm looking for? My brain is so dead.
Like weaponized?
So they got to turn it into magnetized. And so that's safer. And so you got to turn that into a compass. So everything that was magnetized, all you needed was a string from your shirt and you could dangle it and you now had a compass. But they rigged every possible thing you can imagine. So as you imagine, magicians do the same thing, right? You have hollow heels and you have jackets that are reversible, so you could switch them and it becomes a German uniform or a civilian coat, which now because you need clothing in order to escape. So they helped so many POWs escape and downed airmen in occupied zones get out. And yet, kind of like I love the movie, Imitation Game. At the end, if you're familiar with, Bletchley Park, like Kate Quinn writes fantastic, obviously book about that. At the end, it was sort of that idea that you kind of burn everything. We were never here, all classified. We can't talk about it. So some of the things that they did were not declassified until the 1980s, which is why we can finally all talk about them now. So just so much fun. But it became a monster book that I never planned on how much research and kind of how big and kind of sweeping sort of the story became. But really, really proud. So that is coming out in September.
These sound like an incredible bunch of books. Wow.
So fun. Julie, come back. Hi.
I'm back. That was, you guys, all the books sound fantastic. Your latest ones are great, but can't wait for all of these new ones to come out. And hopefully we'll be in a place next fall when these come out that you'll be coming to San Diego and into the store. So fingers crossed for that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So Kimmery, Arlene, hello Arlene out there, one of our great customers and followers here. She said that Doctors and Friends was on her list, but it just bubbled up to the top after hearing this conversation. So, and she's so excited that it's got some of San Diego and the next one's got San Diego in it as well. So thanks, Arlene. And she also said to Susan, Nature Fragile Things was one of her absolute favorites last year. And she thanks all of you ladies for your brilliant writing, which provided endless entertainment and comfort over the past 2 years. So thank you, Arlene, for that. I concur completely. If it wasn't for all of you keeping us entertained, and I know that, and you all probably have the same thing. I don't know about you all, but reading during the first part of the pandemic was really hard. Concentrating, just doing that. But then when we kind of all settled into the fact that here we are and this is it was just, I devoured books, and all of you were part of that devouring. So, and it seems like all of our customers too. So thank you.
Once you got your Tiger King, right? Once you got your Tiger King.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I'm so embarrassed that I watched that. Okay.
But everybody watched it, literally everybody.
I know, but we all should be so embarrassed.
We had to know what everybody was talking about, though. So it became lose your brain cells and then read to gain them back.
Yeah, exactly.
Such a brain suck. It was just like, are you kidding me? This is what entertained us during the pandemic.
I actually heard from somebody who is writing a book about having been the Tiger King's roommate. She was asking about writing stuff. So there's books coming.
That would be an interesting one. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I'm gonna just like zip it because one thing I have lost during, I don't know about all of you, but I actually had somebody say, it was pretty funny. I've socializing and like talking to people, I completely lost my filter. And somebody said, did you ever really have one?
Well, Julie, just so you know, I start off all my live talks now talking about how I can't talk live anymore. And like one of the unfortunate side effects of so many Zooms is that I have developed this awkward, high-pitched laugh at my own jokes because everyone else is muted. And so, and now when I give a live talk, I'm like, I think I'm being funny, and it's not funny.
It's not fun. It is. It's just like these weird, or we pause. We kind of like wait. You know, we're talking. And
Right.
it's like you
Right.
wait.
And in real life, you don't know if should I raise my hand? When do other people
Yeah.
talk?
Oh
You know?
my God, right?
Or square to light up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, who's talking now? Oh no. I mean, it's just insane. So it's super fun. Ladies, it was so great having all of you. You all have websites, I know, that everybody can go to. So everybody just, I think pretty much everybody's is just your name.com, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just put an
And
L in between Susan and Meissner. Susan L. Meissner.
Susan L. Meissner. Perfect. And that'll direct everybody to like your social media stuff and everything. Excellent. Excellent. Well, this was really fun. Kimmery, congratulations. Thank you for putting this wonderful group of ladies together for us. And
Thank you guys so much. I miss you guys.
Miss you too. Congrats on your book. It's so good. I
Mm.
absolutely love it. Deserves all the accolades.
one of the things I wanted to mention real quick is your shirt actually matches the cover.
I
doesn't
know.
it, there?
I'm sure it's on purpose.
I know.
It looks,
I picked it out for that reason. Thank
it
you.
looks lovely. Love it.
You don't have little spikes anywhere.
Actually, and you know what? If you can see the rest of me, I'm wearing like Ugg slippers and fuzzy pants too.
Yeah, that's the only thing about doing live events. It's like we did one last night and I was like, oh my God, I have to like dress and put real shoes on. It's like,
Yeah.
wait a minute.
From the waist down. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, I kind of like working barefoot. All right, ladies, have a great,
All right,
hope to see
thank
you
you.
all again soon. Have a great holiday and wonderful new year, and see you all soon.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Friends at Warwick.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Bye.